Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're planning a fireside chat, really talking about the different friction points that CEOs and other executives experience as they scale. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today is really, I would say, most relevant to B2B, SMBs, and mid-market, knowing that the challenges there are a bit unique. And I think especially with how much is changing in the landscape today, we really wanted to dive in and bring some real-world examples here. So today, you're joined by myself, Natalie Nathanson, and Adi Klevit. I think we'll each take a moment to introduce ourselves, and then we'll dive in. So Adi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching this. So my name is Adi Klevit, and I'm a process consultant. And I'm the founder of Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures. So I'll be talking on what I see from the perspective of organization, putting systems in, making sure that after the go-to-market strategy, after the marketing piece, that you actually have the infrastructure, or there is an infrastructure for expansion and scaling.
Wonderful. And I'm Natalie Nathanson. I am the founder and CEO of Magnetude Consulting. We are a marketing and go-to-market consultancy that helps companies develop and design their go-to-market strategy, their marketing strategy and plan, and all of those strategic components that need to get put in place: messaging, positioning, brand development, the marketing plan itself. And then typically we then move into execution and kind of roll up our sleeves and serve as an extension to the marketing team, or sometimes as the marketing team for companies that don't have that function internally. And I think oftentimes marketing can be thought of as kind of the creative department, and there's certainly a lot of creative components to it. But I think the intersection with, the kind of work that Adi and her firm do is there's really a lot of kind of process that needs to get put in place, both the strategic kind of certain elements to get in place kind of for the first time, but then on the execution side, touch points between marketing and sales, marketing operations, and how do you do things. And I think especially in the world we're in today, where AI and automation is having a bigger and bigger role across many different business functions, certainly including marketing. This is really rising even further to the forefront.
All right. Well, let's start our conversation. The question that we wanted to address first was more in terms of when we work with companies that are growing. You help them in terms of the go-to-market and help in terms of systematization. But at some point, growth feels harder than it should. So from your perspective, when do you see that? When do you see that? At what point is the company at where growth becomes harder than it should?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different points where that can happen, depending on kind of company's life cycle, like where they are in their journey. I think for a startup, for example, moving from founder-led sales to bringing on kind of your first salesperson is a big moment. Another example in the startup world is pre and post funding. So sometimes a seed round, usually Series A, where the what got you here won't get you there comes into play. And I think some of those signs that we see, like where you can feel that go-to-market friction, there might be a lot of activity going on, but it's not driving the same results as it did before. You now have probably like a marketing and sales department, so to speak, and really needing to make sure that everyone is rowing in the same direction, and that you don't have kind of marketing and sales pointing at each other and kind of the age-old, marketing blaming sales for not following up on the leads, sales saying, oh, our leads aren't good enough, right? Those are some of the types of friction points. Not having the visibility. So like if your metrics and kind of data reporting isn't in place and you can't explain what's working or what isn't working and why. So those are just a few of the signs. But I think, all of those are kind of symptoms of needing to really take that step back before you can continue to scale.
Yeah. It's interesting because you mentioned a lot about startups. As you were talking, I definitely see that, but we usually do not work with startups because startups need a go-to-marketing strategy. They're not ready for the processes yet. They should, they can use it, but it's usually not where the budget is going to go towards. So they want to make sure that they actually are in the market selling. But then I see it where the scaling or growth is harder than it should, is where they reach some kind of a plateau, right? There is that phase that you described, then there is this, the momentum forward, and it's going and it's growing, and then it hits some kind of a plateau where then overcoming that plateau becomes an effort. It becomes hard, or it seems harder than it should. So that's where I see that there might be some friction starting at that point as well. And there has to be more of a flow there. So for instance, when there is a lot of activity, but results are inconsistent, I see that a lot in that. Or when teams work harder, but the revenue becomes less predictable. Okay, so we're working hard, but there are no systems in place, so it's less predictable. And also leaders feel constantly pulled in different directions to solve problems. So when that happens, and I know it also from my own experience, when we start growing and we hit that point, I felt like I was going in all directions at once, and I wasn't really able to concentrate on strategy and working on the business and growing the business.
I'm curious, in a number of these areas, do you find there's any differences, having this conversation today versus if we were having it a few years ago? Like, are there things happening in the current market landscape that you feel are making this harder, or is this just kind of an age-old challenge for small businesses?
I think it's an age-old challenge, but you know how it is when you have new challenges, then you tend to look at those new challenges, right? So you might think, oh, well, now I have to implement this new AI, or I need to implement the automation, or my competitor is using something else and I need to learn it. So I think there is additional things that come on top of it, but it is, if you go to the root cause, it is either lack of strategy on how to market, because it doesn't really matter if you're using a new tool or not. It's the strategy itself. So the tool will help with the strategy. And it is also a point of not having the systems. So it's all, in my opinion, it's a symptom of lack of systems. However, whatever tools or whatever is happening, it's still the same root cause. That is the way I look at it. It's not like everything is changing at once. There are things that are still problems that were happening 5, 10 years ago can still happen if the foundation is not fixed. It's just that there are additional things on top of it. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said definitely resonates, and I think is very kind of true on the marketing and go-to-market side of the business as well. And I think, some of the shifts that have happened and that are happening around driven by AI and automation and all of that has shifted. There's more competition, more digital noise, right? Everyone can type into an LLM and a chatbot and get a blog and post it. We're just seeing so much noise everywhere. Buyer behavior is shifting. People are doing more research on their own. That trend isn't new. It's been around probably about 15 years now, but with AI and searching in LLMs and not necessarily spending the same kind of time on company websites or the same kind of motions. So all of these kinds of things, I think, are really driving a shift of the importance of getting these strategic foundations in place. So you're not kind of pointing your scale in the wrong direction, making sure you have the right operational foundations. And that includes like marketing and sales tech stack, full alignment across kind of everyone involved in go-to-market on the priorities, business priorities, ideal customer profile, any product or services. If there's kind of multiple product or solution lines, and then execution, right? Having the right process for execution against the right tactics, all of those things. So I think, to a large degree, as you said, it's similar symptoms that existed before, but I do feel it's exacerbated now. And I think a lot of companies were already kind of struggling to work in this way. And so now I think that's multiplied.
Absolutely. As you were talking, I was thinking, if you're the entrepreneur, you're the founder, there are several things that you can do. You can do nothing and just go with the flow and hope for the best, which is never a good, in my opinion, it's not the right thing to do, because then you're really just the effect of everything that is happening to you. You can try and learn things, which is good. I mean, you definitely want to learn new things. But the key thing is what you need to do is decide on a course of action and stick to it and be willing to change. I mean, even if you stick to it for a day, it's fine because tomorrow there is a new tool. Okay, but you made a decision. That's what you're going to do. I mean, I'm being facetious, not for a day, but you have to have the willingness to adapt and not be rigid. But on the other hand, you got to have that strategy. You got to have that course that you are following and know where you're going to arrive with that. So for instance, if somebody is working with you, they have to work with you because going into an LLM and just create blogs, it's just haphazard. It's just here and there, and it doesn't have a line of what am I doing, and I don't know where I'm going. So it's basically trying to, you're going through the jungle and you have like this little, you're putting the plants and trees aside in order to somehow find a path, as opposed to defining a path, defining the end goal, defining the actions, and accomplishing those actions. That will allow to decrease the noise and allow you to function, because you can get paralyzed by the noise.
Yeah, I think of the quote, like, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? It doesn't ultimately end up at the destination that you were hoping for, which for a company, growth and alignment to your vision is obviously critical.
It's happening. I know for myself, I'm looking as an example with my company. Okay, so do we have this new tool and we have to try it out? Or I hear people, and you and I had this discussion when we recorded another podcast of, oh yeah, well, AI can solve it, but that's just a saying. It's not really okay, so tell me how, but there is no how, or there is no time to execute. I can tell you an example for just before this webinar. I was trying to correct one of our own processes, and I had a conversation back and forth with ChatGPT. Before I know it, it's like 2 hours doing it, right? So it's like, do you have the time to do it? The same thing with the marketing. I mean, do you have the time to do it, the trial and error, until you actually find something that works?
Right. Well, and I do think, not to plug us too much, but I think that's where you can have the guidance around experts in the different fields to kind of short circuit that extensive kind of learning or like floundering process that can happen. I'm curious, to hear from you, like, where do you start? So let's say a company has realized that, their growth has plateaued. They recognize, lack of documented processes or processes in general is holding them back. What do they do first? And what does that initial effort look like?
That's a very good question. So they have to define what's their why. Why do they want systematization? Because, they're stagnant, they're not growing. So what is it? Is it because they're not consistent? Is it because they are too dependent on decision makings and there is too many bottlenecks? Is it because they have to implement new technology, but they don't have the processes documented to implement that technology? So also, I always start with the why. Why are we starting? Why are we doing it? Once we have that defined, then we can take it to the next level of, okay, let's map the processes that we need to document. And then we go into process mapping, and then from there to design and documentation by extracting information. And then from there, we document it, extract information, document, optimize, and then implement. And implementation is very important. And you can put people in front of machines and study that way, but you do need the human interaction to make it more fun, alive. You use both. I mean, we use AI a lot, and I'm totally into using any tool that we can in order to make life faster and easier. But you do have to have that human element in training.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me think to, an era when my firm, Magnitude, did a big kind of undertaking of our process documentation. And it was fairly soon after my vice president of operations joined. She was, of course, very adamant that we need kind of everything documented and more than what we had. And she created kind of a repository or portal for us called The Way. And different people on the team contributed to kind of documenting the processes that we already had. That was kind of step one. Then looking at where are different people doing things differently, and we needed to standardize. Leaving enough, I would say, like room for, flexibility between, different personality types, different working styles. So I think finding that right balance was important to us, especially being kind of a consultancy and kind of a people-driven business. And then there was the internal kind of team training to start using it and to reference it, and for new hires to go there. And then with the new hires, one message we always give is it'll help keep us honest. If you see something in the materials that you've been trained on that does not align with how we're doing things, what gives, right? Are we not following our process, or has our process evolved and we haven't updated the documentation for it?
Absolutely. That's a great example. So Natalie, let's talk now about you in terms of the go-to-market strategy. How do you start and where do you start creating that strategy that will lead the entrepreneur, the business owner in the right direction, to the right point, and get them to where they want to be?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is do that process, right? Because I do think a lot of companies skip it. I talked earlier about startups. It's very tempting to kind of jump into execution. For established small businesses, like, you've clearly been doing a lot of things right. Like, if you've never had kind of a robust go-to-market function or marketing function, you've still gotten to where you are without that. And so it can be hard kind of mentally to make that shift of, well, why do we now have to kind of go back and do all of these foundations? If nothing else, I would say get your leadership team in a room and talk about these areas. It is definitely easier when you have some facilitation and some of that kind of marketing strategy expertise, but one way or another, make sure that you're kind of working through this. We always start with a market assessment. And that's something that is kind of a bigger undertaking initially, and then can be revisited as you're doing annual planning each year or when something major kind of changes in your space. But that includes looking at, what are your competitors doing? Not just direct competitors, but kind of alternatives. So other ways that your target audience solves the problems that your solution addresses. How are competitors talking about themselves? Looking, if it's a company that does have existing kind of marketing and sales processes, doing a deep dive into kind of the systems, the operations, the practices, the processes, all of that. And really what you want to do is be able to outline, I call it the 4 M's: the market, the message, the mechanism, and measurement, right? So the market, kind of who do you go after? And that can be industries, that can be certain kind of behavioral characteristics of an organization type, that can and should be certain roles like job titles or job responsibilities in an organization, geography, of course. So that's the market. The message is, what do you say to them? And the underlying message of that is that's different, that's unique, that's compelling to your target market, right? So not just what do you do, or we have the best people, we have the best technology, but what makes you stand out. So that moves into kind of a company's kind of unique positioning. So that's the message. Market, message, mechanism is next. Mechanism is, how do you reach them? And that's where kind of the go-to-market strategy and tactics come into play. And that can be elements of your marketing plan. That can be, doing channel and partner marketing. It can be freemium-led or sales-led go-to-market motion. So really, what are the different ways that you reach your target audience? And then measurement, right? So knowing that you are you understand kind of all the different kind of data and drivers for your organization. And I think you mentioned something around this earlier, that what's driving activity and results. So from a high level, like, those are the kinds of things that you want to put into your overall go-to-market. And so the initial effort for the leadership team is getting those like core strategic decisions in place. And just as much as knowing who you are, like going after, for example, is knowing who you are not. And that can be a scary thing for companies. But we've really seen the difference once you're pointing all your resources, at that same direction, is where you really start to feel that impact.
Absolutely. And again, it is that plan, it is that strategy that pushes you in a certain direction. And directs you to where you want to go. And then you can evaluate if you're winning or losing because you know where you want to get too. So
I'm wondering, Adi, if there's an example that you have that could help kind of bring to life kind of the impact and importance of going through that exercise, but also, I don't know, maybe the pains that companies are feeling before that.
yeah, that's a good question. And definitely I would love to hear yours as well. So what comes to mind is it's a construction company that we were working with, and they grew really quick. They went from 10 million to over 50 million and on track to be at 80. So we're talking about like within a couple of years. So we're talking about like a really speedy action of extension, like a lot of extension in a very short amount of time. So the demand was strong and the company continues to win more projects. So they were doing things right. Just like you said, there was definitely things that were being done right. But operations start breaking down. So projects start running behind schedule and job costs were inconsistent the way they were calculating it. So they really didn't know. It's like the last M. They didn't really have the measurements there. And, some jobs were really, really highly profitable. Others lost money, but they didn't really know. So the owner was consistently pulled into problem solving, answering questions from project managers and resolving subcontractor issues. So all of that, you can imagine, it was definitely a problem there. So, and the owner basically started believing that he needs better project managers or more experienced staff, which was not really going to be the right solution because you can't, you have experienced staff. So let's work with who you have. So the root issue, the core problem is not the team. It was basically lack of documented systems that were being followed. So lack of consistent systems that were being followed. Each project manager, it was like run their own job. So it was basically like 5 different companies, right? So each one of them did something different estimating methods. Handoffs from sales to operation to production was inconsistent. And the subcontractor expectations were unclear. So all of that, you see that, you go like, okay, you need the systems to solve it. So when you have those inconsistencies multiply, that will create operational friction. So basically what we did is we took the approach that I outlined before, and we defined a consistent estimating process. We standardized project kickoff and handoff procedures. We created job management checklists, clarified roles between sales, estimating, and production. And once we had those systems that were clear, then execution became consistent, and the owner was no longer a bottleneck in terms of having to decide or having to be the judge or having to change processes on the spot. So that is an example of like what happened in that company, because then they were able to continue to extend, and they did because there was consistency.
I love a lot of things about that story, but I think initially like hearing, oh, demand was strong, that seems like a good problem to have. And there's always jokes of, oh, too much growth is a good problem to have. But the reality is it's not always, right? Like it might be good for bringing in, top line revenue, but if you screw something up, like your brand is on the line, your hard-earned customers might not be happy and might leave you, your team sanity and satisfaction is going down. So all of these things, I think like that chaos is felt by all.
It creates like those ups and downs that we all experience, that we always, okay, we want to continue growing, but that if you don't also fix, the demand is there and you help create demand. So, when your clients engage with you, they're going to get demand because that's what you do, is you help them get that demand in. But then what? So that's why it goes hand in hand. And I think it's more like a circle or even a triangle. When you have demand, you push in traffic into the company, into the organization, but now they have to be monitored. Like you have to be, okay, you don't want to create a traffic jam when then other people are not going to be able to arrive, or there will be a crash or whatnot. You have to direct the traffic correctly so it all flows.
Yeah. Right. Well, and in that moment of scale, like your best people are kind of busy doing the work, or all your people are busy, but then they're also the same people that need to be training any new hires and bringing on new customers and doing that the right way. So, I can empathize with that business owner because we had that a number of years ago, and you'll be happy to hear this, but it is before we had documented all of our systems and processes. And, we did feel that pain.
I mean, we felt it too. So we had to take our own medicine and do that. So absolutely. Okay. So Natalie, to give me an example of yours in terms of a scenario where, you encounter problems in scaling when you were working with a company and you saw that growing pains or that scaling pains, and what happened?
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies saw this in kind of our space and heavily in the tech sector around the pandemic and COVID, where a lot of like businesses were booming and were in a little bit of this mode like you're talking about. There's one example I'll share. This was a services business, about 80 people, cybersecurity consulting firm that had grown in part by having multiple practice areas. And so some acquisitions in there, but they offered services, including compliance, advisory services, incident response, so kind of different areas within the cybersecurity space. They were known for being very strong technically. They had grown a lot through just kind of word of mouth and their own network. But growth had started to plateau, and so leadership started getting nervous and wanted to not only continue growing, but also they were still hoping to continue on that scale up journey. And so what did they look at? They looked at pipeline, and so really started pointing fingers towards marketing at like we need help generating more leads, right? Sales doesn't have enough to work with. Sales had been a newer function for them because before they just had the practice leads doing their own selling. And about a year before we came on, they had hired their first kind of dedicated salesperson. So when you think about this initially, like it sounds like maybe it's a demand generation challenge. But pretty quickly, as we started digging in, we realized a number of things were going on. One was that they were kind of casting too wide a net around their target market, kind of not strong in kind of telling their story of how they were unique. And so we were just talking about that a little while ago around what are those strategic foundations that a company needs to get in place. Another thing was that the practice leaders each had their own priorities for where they should be getting that marketing support. And I didn't mention this, but they had two false starts and stops with marketing previously. First, they had hired a digital marketing agency a few years before, thinking that would solve their problems. Unfortunately, it didn't, and they can talk a little bit later about why. Then they said, okay, maybe agencies aren't the right model for us. Let's bring in a marketer internally. They brought that marketer in, kind of a mid-level person that's like a combination of both what they could afford, as well as needing someone who could execute. So they didn't want to bring on somebody too senior. The challenge was then, of course, when these practice leaders each had their own priorities, there was no unified strategy. And so marketing was essentially being asked to support these different directions, these different segments of their market at once. And so this is kind of all the strategic foundations had not been set. Secondly, and we uncovered this as part of the assessment when we were really looking at, okay, let's say we have these strategic foundations in place. Let's make sure we also have the operational ones, right? So the marketing automation system, the CRM. When does a lead get passed from marketing to sales? Because the salesperson is saying they want more leads. We need to make sure we have the right processes for that handoff, that follow up, kind of the SLAs around it, and found that had not really been defined. The tracking and reporting was not kind of fully in place. So for the things that were working, it was hard to exactly tell kind of what was going on there. So there was a lot of activity going on kind of previously, but not a lot of clarity. And so through the work that we did, it did start with those strategic foundations, really honing in on who were their best fit customers. What did that look like as far as their different practice areas? So not trying to kind of start customer relationships kind of anywhere, but being thoughtful around what were the areas that were either kind of higher margin, highest opportunity, where they were the strongest and more differentiated in the market. And then for the CEO had to have some tough conversations with the practice leads that they weren't getting kind of whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted from like for marketing and sales, but articulating like, here's the strategic vision and plan, and here's how we're going to market. And then making sure that all the like internal incentives and all of that aligned to that too. So it was a big undertaking, but it really turned their efforts around pretty significantly.
Good. That's a great example because, you outlined also the thought process behind it. Oh, we thought this is not good for us, but maybe this is good for us, etc. So what happened with the marketing agency? Like, why did you think that the marketing agency was not good for them?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it was because they didn't have a lot of those strategic foundations in place. So that was one thing, that they were just asking the agency, here are the things we offer, go generate leads for it, without that kind of strategic prioritization. And then the second area, and we see this fairly often, is for a small company, without any internal marketing, it's hard to work with a typical kind of digital agency because there's no one fielding it on the other side. So there was the salesperson, the CEO, and then the other leaders were kind of not touching go-to-market outside of the practice leads, who kind of each had their own swim lane. So our firm's model is a bit different. We do work with companies that don't have any internal marketing, and we essentially become the internal marketing department. But I would say like typical agencies and some agencies that I know very well will not work with companies that don't have marketing internally because they know they can't be successful. So that's always something I say to really probe, making sure if a company is working with kind of agency or consultancy, make sure they're really designed for a firm like yours.
Hey, Natalie, that's a great example. It really shows that having a trusted advisor like yourself is so important because, again, it's the direction, it's the strategic direction. And I really hope that the founders, CEOs that are listening to us today really got that. It sparked some ideas in them in terms of looking for the root cause, really identifying what the problem is, whether it's in marketing, the handoff, the operations, and then do something about it and create that roadmap and create the strategy and the alignment between the actions that they are taking. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's not something that is completely new that never existed before. You're just putting it in the right framework with the current technology.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think we've covered a lot of the core areas where those friction points are felt. And really, the important thing, I think, is to pay attention to those early, so you're not kind of exacerbating the pain, but really getting involved and putting it on your radar as kind of the CEO or other executive early enough to do something about it. And then really taking your vision, turning that into the strategy and making sure you have all of the different building blocks in place to be able to bring that to life. So thank you, Adi. This was wonderful. I love the conversation.